development and military occupation during the Vietnam War results in significant Asian migration. So essentially what Sasson is arguing is that a significant factor in causing immigration is that when the U.S. goes overseas through their military, through setting up economic investments, they're creating ties with these countries that then result in massive emigration out of those countries and into the U.S. So it's these linkages that we're creating that result in this immigrant flow. But the question then is, but how does that work, right? If the U.S. is investing in foreign countries, wouldn't subsequent economic growth mean that people in that country would want to stay? Right, and this is sort of the classical argument about outsourcing. You know, a lot of people say, well, you know, yes, we go over and we set up these factories, these companies in the third world, but they wouldn't have a job if we weren't there, right? We're spurring on the economy in those countries. And while that may be the case, why then are people in those countries leaving, right? Why are they leaving that country if there is all this economic growth happening? And this is when Sasson makes the argument that U.S. economic development in these countries displace people from traditional forms of existence. So for example, when we go overseas and we set up commercial agriculture there, this uproots rural subsistence farmers, right? And they have to move into urban areas to find work. Often they can't find work, so what do? They come to the U.S. She also cites the massive recruitment of women into export manufacturing. In many third world countries today, the U.S. has set up, obviously, manufacturing companies overseas, right? Factories. This is, you know, where Nike gets their shoes made, Sony sets up there. And what they do with these companies is they hire women. Hiring women workers reduces costs. You can pay women at a lower rate. And young women in patriarchal societies are seen by foreign employers as obedient, hardworking, and willing to put up with working conditions that would not be tolerated in more developed countries. Okay, and this is something we'll talk about in a little bit. But essentially what happens is that when many of these U.S. companies goes overseas to set up these manufacturing companies, they tend to recruit women primarily because they feel like women can be more pliant in terms of willingness to perform certain duties in really, really bad conditions. I mean, you hear about child labor, right? You hear about sweatshops overseas. This is what Sasson is referring to, is that many of the women in these countries do that type of work. And so men and women alike often get fired after about 5 years because their health deteriorates under poor working environments. And the labor supply is easily replenished by the corporations, right? They hire the next crop of women that come in. And so the ones that sort of have suffered for health reasons, they must find new jobs. And so if they can't find jobs in their own countries, they're going to emigrate to the U.S. And so it's these different factors, right? It's these different factors of the U.S. going into these other countries and investing, and then producing a situation in which you're going to get a lot of immigration to the U.S. And there are also ideological linkages as well. Many of the workers in other countries who work with U.S. companies sort of feel the sense of familiarity with Western values and practices, and therefore they kind of feel more comfortable coming to the U.S. In the U.S., particularly in California, obviously the type of immigration that we tend to concern ourselves with is Mexican immigration, right? And a lot of people have argued that sort of the passing of NAFTA sort of fits in with this model, right? NAFTA essentially enables free trade. It eliminates particular tariffs between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. And what it means is that U.S. companies can go into to Mexico and set up factories, right? Which is essentially what they've done. This is called, they call them the maquiladoras, right? You guys have probably heard of them. They're all along the border, all along the Mexico border. And essentially, you see the same thing happening, where there's a heavy recruitment of women into these factories. The working conditions are very bad. And so when we talk about sort of the Mexican immigration problem, right, to what extent do we need to also look at the way the global economy works and sort of American complicity in terms of creating a global economy in which you have laborers that struggle under poor working conditions and then have to, decide to immigrate to the U.S. for, a better life, right, so that they can lead better lives.